Max's bark cut through the humid Atlanta morning like a warning bell, sharp and insistent in a way that made Sarah Collins's pulse quicken. After 6 years partnering with the Belgian Malinois, she'd learned to read every nuance of his alerts. This wasn't his drug detection bark, or his explosive warning, or even his standard threat assessment. This was something else entirely. "Easy, boy." Sarah approached the weathered vendor booth at Ponce City Market, where the Saturday crowd was beginning to thicken around the converted warehouse's bustling marketplace. Max stood rigid beside a faded blue curtain that served as the booth's back wall, his dark coat bristling, every muscle in his 70-pound frame coiled with the kind of tension she'd only seen during their most dangerous operations. The vendor, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and nervous darting eyes, stepped back from his display of handmade jewelry. "Look, officer, I already told the other cops yesterday. There's nothing back there. Just storage containers and old inventory." Sarah's trained instincts immediately flagged the inconsistency. She'd been patrolling this sector for 3 years, knew every regular vendor, every usual complaint. "Other cops?" She pulled out her radio without breaking eye contact. "Dispatch, this is Unit K97. Can you confirm any police visits to Ponce City Market yesterday, specifically vendor complaints or investigations?" Static crackled through the speaker. "Negative, K97. No units logged for that location in the past 72 hours. The vendor's face went a shade paler, and Max's low growl vibrated through his chest as he pressed closer to the booth's rear curtain. Sarah had worked with her partner through cases that had made headlines across Georgia. The drug trafficking ring that had nearly destroyed 3 high schools. The bomb threat that could have leveled half of downtown Atlanta. The corruption investigation that had sent 2 city councilmen to federal prison. Through it all, she'd learned that Max's nose was more reliable than most witness testimony and twice as honest as most informants. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside and allow us to conduct a routine inspection." Sarah's voice carried the calm authority of someone who'd faced down armed cartel members and domestic terrorists without flinching. She gestured toward Max, whose attention remained laser-focused on whatever lay behind the curtain. "Max, search protocol." The moment she gave the command, Max pushed past the flimsy blue fabric with urgent determination. His barking intensified immediately, echoing from somewhere deeper behind the booth's false back wall, reverberating with an acoustics that suggested more space than should have existed in the narrow vendor stall. Sarah followed, her right hand instinctively positioning near her service weapon while her left pushed aside hanging inventory and storage boxes. The space behind the booth was cramped, cluttered with the expected detritus of a small business: cardboard containers, folded tables, rolls of protective plastic sheeting. But Max wasn't interested in any of the obvious storage materials. Instead, her partner was pawing frantically at what appeared to be solid concrete flooring, his claws scraping against the surface with a metallic echo that shouldn't have existed if it were actual concrete. He was whining with an urgency Sarah had only heard twice before in their partnership. Once, when they'd found those 3 kidnapped children locked in a shipping container down by the port, and once when they'd uncovered the improvised explosive device planted beneath the federal courthouse steps. "There's something down here." Sarah knelt beside Max, running her fingers along what she'd initially assumed was the booth's concrete foundation. Up close, she could see hairline seams, perfectly disguised, but unmistakably artificial. It wasn't solid flooring at all. It was a hatch, designed to blend seamlessly with the surrounding surface. The vendor had followed them into the cramped space, and his face had gone from pale to ashen. "You don't understand what you're doing. You need to leave this alone, right now." Sarah looked up at him, studying the genuine terror in his eyes. This wasn't the nervous discomfort of someone hiding minor violations or tax issues. This was the bone-deep fear of someone who knew exactly what lay hidden beneath their feet and understood the consequences of its discovery. "What's down there?" "Please," he whispered, glancing nervously toward the market's main walkway, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. "They'll kill me if they know I talked. They'll kill my family. You have to just walk away and forget you were ever here." Max's insistent whining grew louder, more desperate, his claws scraping against the false flooring with increasing urgency. Sarah had seen her partner locate everything from hidden caches of military-grade weapons to missing persons buried in shallow graves, but she'd never witnessed him display this level of frantic determination to reach something. She made the decision that would irrevocably change both their lives. "Dispatch, I need a full crime scene unit at Ponce City Market, vendor booth 7 Alpha. We're going to need excavation equipment, structural assessment, and a hazmat team on standby." The radio crackled with confirmation as Sarah continued examining the hidden hatch. Whatever construction lay beneath had been professionally concealed, requiring significant time, money, and expertise to install. This wasn't amateur hour. Someone with serious resources had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide something directly beneath one of Atlanta's most popular public spaces. As they waited for backup, Sarah watched Max continue his relentless assault on the false flooring, his behavior growing more agitated by the minute. Whatever was down there had been deliberately buried, carefully hidden from law enforcement and the public. And if her 6 years of experience with Max had taught her anything, it was that the things people worked hardest to hide were usually the things that could destroy lives, including the lives of those brave enough or foolish enough to uncover them. The vendor looked at her with a mixture of resignation and pure terror, his hands shaking as he spoke. "Officer, you have no idea what you're about to unleash. Some doors should never be opened." Sarah Collins had dismantled international criminal networks, prevented multiple terrorist attacks, and brought corrupt officials from the highest levels of city government to justice. But as Max's desperate barking echoed through the morning air and the weight of impending discovery settled around them, she realized this case might be fundamentally different from anything they'd faced before. The hatch opened with a pneumatic hiss that sent Max scrambling backward, his ears flattened against his skull. Sarah had never seen her partner retreat from anything. Not armed suspects, not explosive devices, not even the rabid dog that had cornered them in that abandoned warehouse last spring. But whatever was rising from beneath Ponce City Market's concrete floor had triggered every survival instinct in the seasoned K-9 officer. "Jesus Christ," muttered Detective Ray Martinez, the first backup to arrive. He'd worked homicide for 15 years, but the smell emerging from the underground chamber made him cover his nose with his sleeve. "What the hell is down there?" Sarah clicked on her tactical flashlight and peered into the opening. The beam revealed a ladder descending approximately 12 feet into what appeared to be a professionally constructed underground room. The walls were lined with white tile, and the floor below gleamed with the sterile shine of medical-grade surfaces. But it was the equipment she could make out in the shadows that made her stomach turn. "Ray, we need that hazmat team here now," she said, her voice steady despite the growing dread in her chest. "And call the FBI. Whatever this is, it's way beyond local jurisdiction." Max had recovered from his initial shock and was now straining against his lead, desperate to investigate further. Sarah knelt beside him, running her fingers through his thick coat. "I know, boy. I know you want to go down there. But not yet." The vendor, who'd identified himself as Marcus Chen, sat on a nearby crate with his head in his hands. "I should have moved my booth months ago," he whispered. "I should have known this day would come." "How long have you known about this?" Sarah asked, though she kept her primary attention on the opening, watching for any movement below. Chen looked up with haunted eyes. 3 months. I was setting up early one morning when I heard voices coming from underneath. At first I thought it was the building's maintenance system, maybe workers in the basement. But then I realized there wasn't supposed to be a basement under this section. Detective Martinez had moved closer to the opening, his own flashlight adding to the illumination below. "Sarah, you need to see this." She joined him at the edge, and her trained eye immediately catalogued what she was seeing. The underground chamber was larger than it had initially appeared, at least 20 by 30 feet, with multiple rooms branching off from the central area. But it was the medical equipment that made her blood run cold. Surgical tables, IV stands, and what looked suspiciously like an operating theater setup. They were bringing people here, Chen continued, his voice barely audible above the market's background noise. I started paying attention after I knew what to look for. Black SUVs would park in the loading dock area, usually late at night or very early morning. Men in suits would escort other people who looked scared, confused. They'd disappear for hours. Max was whining again, but this time it was different. Not the urgent alert from earlier, but something sadder, more mournful. Sarah had heard that sound only once before, when they'd discovered the mass grave outside Marietta. Her partner could sense death in ways that still amazed the forensics teams. How many people? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Dozens, Chen replied. Maybe more. They were always different, men, women, different ages, different races, but they all had that same look of terror. The crime scene unit arrived with their equipment, followed closely by a team from the FBI's Atlanta field office. Agent Rebecca Hayes, a woman in her 40s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, took charge of the scene with the efficiency of someone who'd handled too many cases like this. Officer Collins, Hayes said, reviewing the preliminary reports on her tablet. Your K-9 unit has quite a reputation. Drug interdiction, explosives detection, missing persons. How did he react to whatever's down there? Like he was detecting death, Sarah answered honestly. Multiple victims, based on his behavior patterns. Hayes nodded grimly. We're going to need to process this methodically. The construction alone suggests serious money and organization. This isn't some amateur operation. Indeed, as the technical teams began setting up their equipment, Sarah noticed something that made her pulse quicken. A black SUV had pulled into the market's loading area, exactly as Chen had described. Two men in expensive suits were walking purposefully toward the vendor area, their eyes scanning the crowd with professional assessment. Ray, she said quietly, nodding toward the approaching men. We've got company. Detective Martinez followed her gaze and immediately understood. Both men had the bearing of people accustomed to violence, their suits cut to conceal weapons, their movement coordinated in a way that suggested military or law enforcement training. Max had noticed them too. His posture had shifted into full alert mode, hackles rising as he fixed his attention on the approaching figures. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not his general warning sound, but the specific threat assessment bark he used for armed and dangerous suspects. Agent Hayes, Sarah called softly, I think we're about to have visitors. The FBI agent looked up from her tablet, immediately recognizing the threat. With practiced efficiency, she signaled to her team while speaking into her radio. All units, we have potential hostiles approaching the scene. Maintain positions, but be ready to respond. The two men had stopped approximately 50 feet away, clearly having spotted the law enforcement presence. They were speaking quietly into phones, their eyes never leaving the crime scene setup. One of them, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a scar running along his left jawline, seemed to be receiving instructions. Chen had noticed them too, and his face went white with terror. Oh God, they're here! They know we found it! Who are they? Sarah demanded, keeping her voice low while maintaining visual contact with the suspects. I don't know their names, Chen whispered, but I've seen them before. They're the ones who run this whole thing, the ones who decide who goes down there and who comes back up. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before a major bust. But this time was different. This time, she was looking at an operation that had been running for months, possibly years, directly beneath one of the city's most popular public spaces. An operation that involved kidnapping, disappearances, and what appeared to be some kind of medical experimentation. Max pressed against her leg, his warm bulk a reassuring presence as the situation continued to develop. Whatever they'd stumbled into, it was bigger than anything they'd faced before. And if the terror in Marcus Chen's eyes was any indication, they were all in more danger than they'd initially realized. The man with the scar was walking toward them now, his hand moving inside his jacket. Sarah Collins had faced down armed criminals, terrorists, and corrupt officials. But as she watched this stranger approach with deadly intent, she realized that uncovering the truth beneath Ponce City Market might cost more than she'd ever imagined. The gunshot echoed through Ponce City Market like a thunderclap, sending shoppers diving for cover behind vendor stalls and concrete pillars. Sarah Collins felt the bullet whistle past her ear as she dropped into a tactical crouch, pulling Max behind a wooden display case while drawing her service weapon in one fluid motion. "Federal agents, drop your weapons!" Agent Hayes shouted from behind an overturned table, her voice cutting through the screams and chaos as civilians fled in every direction. The man with the scar had missed his first shot, but his partner was already moving to flank their position. Sarah could see the cold professionalism in their movements. These weren't street criminals or desperate amateurs. They were trained killers, and they'd come prepared to eliminate everyone who'd seen too much. "Max, down!" Sarah commanded, and her partner immediately flattened himself against the concrete floor. In the chaos, her mind flashed back to another day, another scene of violence that had forged the unbreakable bond between them. 4 years ago, Sarah had been a different person. Fresh out of the police academy, partnered with a veteran K-9 officer named Jim Kowalski and his aging German shepherd Rex. They'd responded to what seemed like a routine drug bust in an abandoned warehouse near the airport. "Collins, you stay back and watch the perimeter," Kowalski had ordered. "Rex and I will clear the interior." But Sarah had heard something that made her blood freeze. The distinctive whine of a dog in distress. Not Rex's voice, but something younger, more desperate. Against orders, she'd entered the warehouse through a side entrance. What she'd found inside had changed everything. The drug operation was a front for something much worse, an illegal dogfighting ring where stolen pets and captured strays were used as bait animals to train fighting dogs for wealthy clients. In the corner of the warehouse, barely 6 months old and covered in wounds from being used as a practice target, was a Belgian Malinois puppy who should have been dead. But Max, though he wasn't Max yet, had looked at her with eyes that held more intelligence and determination than many humans she'd known. Despite his injuries, despite the trauma, he'd somehow found the strength to crawl toward her outstretched hand. The raid had gone wrong. Kowalski and Rex had been ambushed, and Sarah had been forced to call for backup while protecting the wounded puppy with her own body. By the time reinforcements arrived, both veteran officers were dead, and Sarah was the only one left to testify against the ring's operators. She'd adopted Max during his recovery, and they'd trained together through the police academy's K-9 program. Every day, she'd watched him overcome his early trauma, transforming from a broken puppy into one of the most capable police dogs in the Southeast. But more than that, she'd learned to trust him completely because they'd both survived hell together. The memory lasted only seconds, but it reminded Sarah why she never backed down from a fight. She and Max had been through worse than 2 armed men, no matter how professional they appeared. "Collins?" Detective Martinez called from his position near the crime scene tape. "We've got them in a crossfire. Hayes is moving to cut off their escape route." Sarah assessed the tactical situation quickly. The man with the scar was approximately 30 feet away, using a support pillar for cover, while his partner had taken position behind an overturned food cart. Both had clear fields of fire, but they were also exposed to flanking maneuvers. "Max, search and alert," she whispered to her partner. It was an unconventional use of his training, but Max understood immediately. Instead of looking for drugs or explosives, he would use his superior senses to track the exact positions of their opponents. Max's belly crawled forward, his nose working constantly. After a few seconds, he looked back at Sarah and gave a single sharp bark, the signal that meant target acquired. Then he shifted his attention to the left and repeated the signal. He'd located both shooters and was providing real-time intelligence. "Ray, they're moving to flank us," Sarah called out. Scarface is still behind the pillar, but his partner is working his way around to our left. Agent Hayes had apparently received the same information through her own channels. All units, we have subjects moving to surround the primary crime scene. Maintain containment, but be aware of civilian safety. The second shooter made his mistake by underestimating Max's training. As he rounded the corner of a jewelry display, focused entirely on the human officers, he failed to notice the 70-pound Malinois who'd been tracking his every movement. Max's attack was precise and devastating. 6 years of police training had taught him exactly where to strike to disable an armed suspect without causing fatal injury. The man's weapon went flying as Max's jaws clamped down on his wrist, and his scream of pain and surprise echoed through the market. "Subject down!" Sarah shouted, moving quickly to secure the fallen weapon while Max maintained his hold on the suspect. "One in custody!" The man with the scar, realizing his tactical situation had collapsed, made a desperate decision. Instead of continuing the firefight, he turned and ran toward the market's main exit, pushing through the crowd of fleeing civilians with his weapon still drawn. "He's running!" Martinez called out. Heading for the street, Sarah had a split-second decision to make. She could pursue the fleeing suspect, potentially ending the threat, but leaving Max to guard the prisoner. Or she could stay and ensure they didn't lose the one solid lead they'd captured. "Max, release and guard," she commanded. Her partner immediately released the wounded suspect, but positioned himself to prevent any escape attempt. His teeth bared in a display that needed no translation. "Agent Hayes, suspect is fleeing north toward the Beltline entrance," Sarah reported into her radio. "Armed and extremely dangerous. We have one in custody." As FBI agents coordinated the pursuit of the escaped shooter, Sarah knelt beside the man Max had taken down. He was bleeding from the bite wounds, but they weren't life-threatening. More importantly, he was conscious and able to speak. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into," he said through gritted teeth, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and genuine fear. "This operation goes deeper than anything you've ever imagined." Sarah looked down at him, remembering the underground medical facility, the witness testimony about dozens of victims, and the professional nature of their attack. "Then start talking, because right now you're looking at attempted murder of federal agents. That's life in prison if you're lucky." The man's expression shifted from defiance to something approaching desperation. "You don't understand. If I talk, they'll kill me. They'll kill my family. They have resources you can't imagine." "Who are they?" Sarah pressed, while Max maintained his vigilant guard position. "People who make problems disappear," the suspect replied. "People who've been running this operation for years, taking people who won't be missed and using them for research that would make your stomach turn." As FBI agents began processing the crime scene and Agent Hayes coordinated the manhunt for the escaped suspect, Sarah realized they'd stumbled into something far more sinister than a simple criminal enterprise. This was organized, well-funded, and had been operating in plain sight for years. Max pressed against her leg, his warm presence a reminder of everything they'd overcome together. Whatever lay ahead, whatever dangers they'd uncovered, they would face them as they always had, as partners who'd proven that loyalty and trust could overcome even the darkest evil. The captured suspect died in the ambulance before reaching Grady Hospital, foam spilling from his lips as his body convulsed in the final throes of cyanide poisoning. Sarah watched the paramedics frantically attempt resuscitation through the rear window, knowing their efforts were futile. Someone had just eliminated their only lead with the efficiency of a military operation. "Suicide pill?" Agent Hayes confirmed, ending her phone call with the medical examiner. "Embedded in a false tooth, these people came prepared to die rather than talk." Sarah felt Max press closer against her leg as they stood in the hospital parking lot, both of them still processing the implications. In 6 years of partnership, they'd faced organized crime, terrorist cells, and corrupt officials, but never an enemy willing to kill their own operatives to maintain secrecy. "The escaped suspect is in the wind. Detective Martinez reported, approaching with a tablet full of updates. No hits on facial recognition, no vehicle identification, nothing. It's like he vanished into thin air. Hayes pulled up the preliminary forensics report from the underground facility. The lab results are coming back, and they're worse than we expected. The blood samples they're finding down there match at least 12 different DNA profiles, 12 separate victims. Sarah's phone buzzed with an urgent text message from an unknown number. Stop digging or join them. You have 6 hours. The message included a photograph that made her blood freeze. It was Max, taken through a telephoto lens sometime during their morning patrol. Crosshairs superimposed over his image. They're threatening Max, she said, showing the message to Hayes and Martinez. Her voice remained steady, but inside, a cold fury was building. Threatening her was one thing, but targeting her partner crossed a line that these people clearly didn't understand. Hayes examined the phone. They've been watching you longer than we realized. This photo was taken at least a week ago, based on your uniform configuration. Sarah, I need you to consider protective custody for both of you. Like hell, Sarah replied. We're not running from this. Max and I have never backed down from a fight, and we're not starting now. Max seemed to sense the tension in her voice and looked up at her with those intelligent brown eyes that had seen too much violence but never lost their determination. She scratched behind his ears, drawing comfort from the familiar ritual that had gotten them through their darkest moments. Agent Hayes's phone rang, and her expression grew increasingly grim as she listened. We've got a problem, she announced after ending the call. The facility at Ponce City Market was just one location. Our tech team tracked financial records from the equipment serial numbers, and they've identified at least 4 other sites across the southeast. How many victims total? Martinez asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Conservative estimate? Over 50 people in the past 2 years. All missing persons cases that never got proper investigation because the victims were specifically chosen from vulnerable populations. Homeless individuals, undocumented immigrants, people without strong family connections. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. This wasn't just a local criminal enterprise, it was a regional operation with the resources and connections to identify vulnerable targets, transport them across state lines, and dispose of evidence with professional efficiency. The scale suggested government-level resources or corporate backing. What kind of research were they conducting? She asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. Hayes consulted her tablet. Preliminary analysis suggests medical experimentation, surgical procedures, drug trials, possibly organ harvesting for black market sales. The equipment we found includes surgical robots, advanced monitoring systems, and biological storage units that would cost millions of dollars. Max suddenly tensed, his ears swiveling toward the hospital entrance. His low growl indicated incoming threat, and Sarah immediately shifted into tactical awareness. A black sedan had pulled into the hospital parking lot, moving too slowly and deliberately to be ordinary traffic. "We've got company," Sarah announced, her hand moving instinctively toward her weapon. Same operational profile as the market shooting. The sedan stopped approximately 50 yards away, and 3 men in dark suits emerged. Unlike the previous attackers, these individuals made no attempt to conceal their weapons or their hostile intent. They spread out in a coordinated pattern that suggested military training and operational experience. "Federal agents!" Hayes shouted, drawing her service weapon. "Drop your weapons and get on the ground." Instead of complying, the lead operative raised what appeared to be a modified assault rifle and opened fire. The first burst shattered the windshield of a nearby ambulance, sending glass fragments flying in every direction. Sarah dove behind a concrete barrier, pulling Max with her as bullets sparked off the pavement around their position. "Ray, we need backup now," she called into her radio. "Officer under fire at Grady Hospital. Multiple armed suspects." Agent Hayes had taken cover behind a parked car, but her position was being steadily compromised by concentrated gunfire. "These aren't street criminals," she called out. "Military-grade weapons, professional tactics. We're dealing with private contractors or special operations personnel." Max was agitated, wanting to engage the threat, but smart enough to stay low under Sarah's protective hand. She could feel his muscles coiled with tension, ready to strike if given the opportunity. But this wasn't like the market confrontation. These attackers were maintaining distance and using superior firepower to pin them down. "Sarah!" Martinez shouted from his position near the hospital entrance. "They're trying to flank us from the west side. I count at least 2 more vehicles approaching." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. What had started as a medical examination had become a coordinated assault by people with unlimited resources and a willingness to engage law enforcement in broad daylight. The message was clear: stop investigating or face escalating violence. Sarah's phone buzzed again with another text. "Last warning, walk away or everyone you care about dies." She looked down at Max, whose unwavering loyalty had never wavered through 6 years of dangerous operations. Then she looked at Agent Hayes and Detective Martinez, dedicated professionals who were risking their lives to uncover the truth about dozens of murdered victims. "Not happening," she muttered, and reached for her radio. "All units, this is Officer Collins. We have federal agents under fire at Grady Hospital, multiple suspects with military-grade weapons. We need immediate tactical response and air support." Urdi, as sirens began wailing in the distance and the sound of approaching helicopters filled the air, Sarah realized they'd crossed a point of no return. Whatever organization was behind the underground medical facilities had just declared war on law enforcement. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd threatened Max, and that meant they'd chosen the wrong enemy. The real fight was just beginning, and Sarah Collins had never lost a fight that mattered, especially not when innocent lives hung in the balance and her partner was counting on her to see justice done. The warehouse in Marietta sat like a cancer in the industrial district, its windows blacked out, and its perimeter patrolled by armed guards who moved with military precision. Sarah crouched behind a shipping container 50 yards away, watching the target through night vision binoculars, while Max lay silently beside her, every muscle ready for action. "Thermal imaging confirms at least 20 hostiles inside," Agent Hayes whispered through her earpiece. "Multiple heat signatures in the basement level, possibly victims still alive." The breakthrough had come from Marcus Chen, who'd remembered seeing construction vehicles with a specific company logo during the late-night operations at Ponce City Market. The FBI's financial investigation had traced the shell company back to this facility, and satellite surveillance had revealed the same black SUVs that had been used in the hospital attack. "This is it," Sarah murmured to Max, running her fingers through his thick coat one last time. "This is where we end it." The past 18 hours had been a whirlwind of federal coordination and tactical planning. The organization they were facing had revealed itself to be even more sophisticated than initially suspected. A network of private military contractors and corrupt medical professionals conducting illegal human experimentation for wealthy clients who paid millions for organs, genetic research, and psychological testing. But the most shocking revelation had come from intercepted communications. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a respected surgeon from Emory University who'd been reported missing 6 months ago, was being held as a prisoner inside the warehouse, forced to perform operations on kidnapped victims under threat of death. "Alpha team in position," Hayes reported. "Beta team has the rear exit secured. Charlie team is standing by for extraction of any survivors." Sarah checked her equipment one final time. Tactical vest, night vision goggles, her service weapon, and Max's protective gear that would shield him from debris and potential gunfire. They'd done this dance dozens of times before, but never with stakes this high or enemies this dangerous. "Remember," Hayes continued through the comm system, "our primary objective is victim rescue. Secondary objective is evidence preservation. These people have resources to disappear forever if we don't get everything we need tonight." The assault began with coordinated precision. Flashbang grenades shattered the warehouse windows as 3 teams of federal agents moved simultaneously through multiple entry points. Sarah and Max went through the main entrance with Alpha Team, their night vision cutting through the smoke and chaos as armed guards scrambled to respond. Max immediately went to work, his nose leading them through the maze of corridors toward the strongest scent trails. His behavior indicated multiple victims in various stages of medical distress, some recent, others who'd been held for extended periods. Basement access 20 meters ahead, Sarah reported, following Max's lead as gunfire erupted from defensive positions throughout the building. These weren't the desperate last stands of cornered criminals. The resistance was organized, disciplined, and equipped with military-grade weapons. The descent into the underground levels revealed the true horror of the operation. Room after room of medical equipment, surgical theaters, and holding cells where victims had been kept like laboratory animals. Sarah's stomach turned as she saw the evidence of what had been done to innocent people in the name of profit and scientific curiosity. "Multiple survivors located," Agent Hayes called through the radio. "We need medical teams down here immediately." Max had led them to a reinforced door at the end of the corridor, behind which they could hear muffled voices and the sound of medical equipment. Sarah's tactical training told her to wait for backup, but Max's agitated whining suggested that whatever was happening inside couldn't wait. "Breach and clear," she decided, stepping back as federal agents used explosive charges to blow the door off its hinges. Inside, they found Dr. Elena Vasquez standing over an operating table where a young woman lay unconscious, IV lines and monitoring equipment indicating she was being prepared for surgery. The doctor's hands were shaking and tears streamed down her face as she looked up at the rescue team. "Thank God," she whispered. "I thought no one would ever find us." But their moment of relief was shattered by the sound of automatic weapons fire from the corridor behind them. The facility's security forces had regrouped and were mounting a coordinated counterattack, trying to eliminate the evidence, including the witnesses. "Sarah!" Martinez's voice crackled through the radio. "We've got a problem. The building's rigged with explosives. They're planning to destroy everything and everyone inside." Max was already moving, his nose working frantically as he searched for additional survivors. His behavior indicated more victims deeper in the facility, people who would die if the building was destroyed before they could be evacuated. "How long do we have?" Sarah asked, following Max down another corridor while federal agents worked to secure the operating room. "Unknown," Hayes replied. "Could be minutes, could be an hour, but we need to get everyone out now." Indeed, the next 20 minutes were a blur of tactical movement and desperate rescue operations. Max led them to 6 more victims in various stages of medical experimentation, while federal agents engaged in running firefights with security forces throughout the facility. The organization's leaders had clearly decided that destroying the evidence was more important than preserving their operation. Sarah found herself face to face with the man with the scar who'd escaped from Ponce City Market. He was standing in what appeared to be a control room, his hand hovering over a red button that undoubtedly controlled the explosive charges. "You should have walked away," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Now everyone dies." Max was already moving before Sarah could react, launching himself at the man's arm as he reached for the detonation switch. The impact sent both the suspect and the dog crashing into a bank of computer equipment, sparks flying, as expensive machinery was destroyed in the struggle. Sarah's training took over as she moved to secure the explosive controls, while Max maintained his hold on the suspect. But as she examined the detonation device, her blood ran cold. The timer was already running, and they had less than 3 minutes to evacuate the entire facility. All teams, she shouted into her radio. "Building detonation in 3 minutes. Emergency evacuation, all personnel." The next 2 minutes and 47 seconds were the longest of Sarah's life. Federal agents carried unconscious victims up from the basement levels while she and Max ran through the facility one final time, making sure no one was left behind. The sound of helicopters overhead indicated that medical evacuation was standing by, but only if they could get everyone out in time. With 30 seconds left on the timer, Sarah and Max reached the facility's main exit, carrying the last victim between them. As they dove behind the concrete barriers that Agent Hayes had established as a safe perimeter, the warehouse erupted in a massive explosion that lit up the night sky like a miniature sun. But they'd done it. 12 victims rescued alive, including Dr. Vasquez, who would provide crucial testimony about the organization's operations. Tons of evidence recovered before the explosion, and most importantly, the network's primary facility destroyed, along with several of its key operatives. As Sarah lay on the ground beside Max, both of them covered in dust and debris but miraculously uninjured, she realized they'd achieved something she thought was impossible just days ago. They'd taken down an organization with virtually unlimited resources and connections, and they'd saved lives that would have been lost forever. Max looked at her with those intelligent brown eyes, his tail wagging slightly despite their exhaustion. They'd done it together, as they always did, partners to the end. 6 months later, Sarah Collins stood on the courthouse steps in downtown Atlanta, watching as the last of 17 defendants was led away in shackles. The federal prosecution had been swift and merciless. Life sentences without parole for the organization's leaders, decades in prison for their accomplices, and the complete dismantling of a network that had operated across 4 states for nearly 3 years. Max sat beside her, wearing a new commendation medal on his tactical harness, the Department of Justice's highest honor for a K-9 officer. The ceremony that morning had drawn media attention from across the country, but Sarah knew the real victory wasn't in the recognition. It was in the lives they'd saved and the justice they'd delivered. Officer Collins, a young woman, approached hesitantly, her face bearing the faint scars of medical procedures, but her eyes bright with life. "I'm Maria Santos. You probably don't remember me, but I was one of the people you rescued from that warehouse." Sarah did remember. Maria had been the unconscious woman on Dr. Vasquez's operating table, moments away from having her organs harvested for a wealthy client who'd paid $2 million for a compatible liver. "How are you doing, Maria?" "Better every day," Maria replied, kneeling down to pet Max, who accepted her attention with the gentle dignity he showed to all victims. "The doctors say I'll make a full recovery, but I wanted to thank you both. You gave me my life back." Over the past 6 months, Sarah had received similar visits from 8 of the 12 survivors they'd rescued. Each had endured unimaginable trauma, but each was rebuilding their life with the knowledge that their suffering had helped bring down an organization that had murdered 53 people and would have continued killing indefinitely. Dr. Elena Vasquez had proven to be the prosecution's star witness, providing detailed testimony about the organization's medical procedures, client list, and operational methods. Her courage in testifying despite death threats had ensured that even the network's most powerful clients, including a tech billionaire and 2 foreign diplomats, faced justice for their crimes. "The FBI task force wants to meet with you next week," Detective Martinez said, joining them on the courthouse steps. "There are indications that similar operations might be running in other parts of the country. They want you and Max to head up a new unit specifically designed to combat human trafficking networks." Sarah looked down at Max, who was watching the courthouse with the alert attention of a dog who understood that important things happened in places like this. After 6 years of partnership, she could read his body language as clearly as spoken words, and she could see that he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. "What do you think, partner?" she asked, scratching behind his ears. "Ready to take on the bad guys again?" Max's tail wagged once, his signal for affirmative, and Sarah felt the familiar surge of determination that had carried them through their darkest moments. The organization they'd destroyed had been just one tentacle of a much larger problem, and there were still innocent people out there who needed someone willing to fight for them. Agent Hayes approached with a tablet full of preliminary reports about potential operations in Houston, Miami, and Chicago. "The patterns are consistent with what we found here," she explained. "Underground facilities, missing persons from vulnerable populations, and financial networks that suggest massive resources behind the operations." "How soon do we start?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. People were suffering while they stood on courthouse steps celebrating their victory, and every day they delayed meant more victims disappearing into systems designed to exploit and destroy human lives. "Next Monday," Hayes replied. "We'll be based out of Quantico, but the field work will take you all over the country. It won't be easy, and it won't be safe. These networks have learned from what happened here, and they'll be better prepared for law enforcement intervention." Sarah thought about Marcus Chen, the vendor whose courage in speaking up had started everything. He was back at Ponce City Market, running his jewelry booth and living without the constant fear that had haunted him for months. He'd chosen to do the right thing despite knowing the personal cost, and that choice had saved dozens of lives. She thought about the families of the 53 confirmed victims, who finally had answers about what had happened to their loved ones. The closure wouldn't bring back the dead, but it would allow the healing process to begin. Most of all, she thought about Max, the wounded puppy she'd found in that warehouse 4 years ago, who'd grown into one of the most decorated canine officers in federal law enforcement. His story was proof that survival wasn't just about enduring trauma, but about transforming that experience into the strength to protect others. "We'll be ready," Sarah said, speaking for both herself and Max. "These people think they can hide behind money and connections, but they don't understand what they're up against." As they walked down the courthouse steps toward their patrol car, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, her pulse quickened with memories of the death threats they'd received during the investigation. But this message was different. "Thank you for not giving up. You saved my daughter's life." A grateful father, Max jumped into the passenger seat of their patrol car with the easy confidence of a partner who knew exactly where he belonged. Sarah started the engine and pulled into Atlanta traffic, heading back toward headquarters and whatever new challenges awaited them. In the rearview mirror, she could see the courthouse where justice had been served, where the voices of the murdered and the testimonies of the survivors had finally been heard. But ahead of them lay the real work, finding the next network, rescuing the next group of victims, and proving once again that some partnerships were strong enough to overcome any evil. Sarah Collins and Max had spent 6 years building a reputation as the kind of team that didn't back down from impossible odds. Now they were about to take that reputation national, carrying the fight to every corner of the country where predators thought they could operate with impunity. The war against human trafficking was far from over, but as Sarah watched Max's alert posture and saw the determination in his intelligent brown eyes, she knew they were ready for whatever came next. After all, they'd faced worse odds before and emerged victorious. Together, they'd proven that loyalty, courage, and an unshakable commitment to justice could triumph over the darkest evil, and they were just getting started.